Chapter 18, To the River of Transference. We are what we pretend to be, so we must be careful about what we pretend to be. Kurt Vonnegut. Everybody knows the heart is just a pump, but you feel anticipation there, love, trepidation, there. It can beat along like that for 100 years or more, or, like flipping a switch, it could stop right now. After a stale breakfast of government surplus food in a drizzling rain, preceded by the cook yelling at us as we stood numbly by, we hit the road, the wipers slapping off the rain. Fayaway and I talking about important things but ignoring the subtext. It was like endlessly kissing Nina's silver lips without knowing what we were kissing about. But I was not always talking about what I was talking about, and was afraid in my newfound honesty I might start talking about it without realizing it. I was torn, the right hand not sure what the left hand was doing, broken into components with no idea which parts were integral to the whole creature. I told her about what a good dad my dad was, how he read great books to me before dawn in the tub, how he gave me big breakfasts while watching the Farm Report and the Three Stooges, how we'd walk to school as the sun came up and I'd beat my chest and call out like Tarzan when I saw the sun. But I had a sense, a subliminal knowledge of what I was not talking about, like how my dad had commandeered a pair of heavy traditional silk pajamas and a lungi the prince had given me, or how he ignored an obvious stain the prince had left. I was not talking about how my dad had encouraged me to spend time, not just with Mr. Rose, but with students he specially mentored, one of whom I saw very drunk one morning on the steps of the administration building, ranting about the plight of the handsome sailor, who I knew was Billy Budd. I was not talking about Queequeg and his harpoon. I wasn't talking about how his mother made fun of him, saying, when he reads Bismarck, he becomes Bismarck, and how for this, and 1,000 other slights, he fairly openly hated his mother, and this transferred to flitty women like his mom, though he did like lesbians, who my mom called old maids. I was not talking about my dad's personal life, how when I was bladelessly shaving after a bath, I saw him stick his finger in a small jar with a waxy substance and stick it in his bum. I asked him why he did that, and he said, just so I'm ready. I was only 4, still, I remembered not to talk about it. Likewise, I was not talking about the fact that my secretly gay uncle had lived years before at a men's club that my dad belonged to, where all his best friends were. Yet these best friends never came to the house. He only talked about them to me despite my incomprehension. Neither was I talking about how my mom, who was known as a flirt, would go on and on about how handsome the prince was, or the time my dad disappeared the only time the prince showed up in the city of chemicals and steel, or the noises I'd made, or the defilement of my little blue tent. I wasn't talking about any of that. But most of all, I was not talking about how my dad had repeatedly facilitated rendezvous with the prince, even up to delivering me to the prince's final solution, in his tent on a faraway point of land on a slow-moving brackish river with no one around. I wasn't talking about any stuff my mom called private family stuff that I should never talk about at school or anywhere else. I wasn't talking about it, tried not to think about it, but I wasn't forgetting. I was saving it unknowingly, allowing it to filter down into my semi-conscious sediments, to mix with the dead illusions and delusions, waiting for the dredger of time and life to finally excavate the moldering disease, with no idea how long I'd have to wait for the dredger to come. It was all too fresh in my mind, and from within that silent yoke began to slowly grow the unspoken admission, a sensation more than a thought, that I'd been scapegoated in the prince's tent at the old camp, bled out on the altar of the prince's ignoble and false gods that my dad also worshipped. I was a stooge for the frustrated will to power of Napoleon on Elba, a patsy for the closet of Frederick the Great, a fall guy for the execution of Charles I, a dupe for the luxurious agonies of the long wait of Charles II in exile, and a penance proxy for every other king who'd ever felt shortchanged, like my dad felt shortchanged by his childhood in a hateful 20-room house. I was a sin offering for the poison of Anglophilic pederasty, and to the excesses and luxury of Edward VII, and the English sins of the Raj, and all my dad's pleasure in Otto von Bismarck eating 80 oysters in one sitting, and Carnegie's Aquiline super yacht, built on the lungs of coal miners and the burns of steel workers. If you had to ask how much it cost, you couldn't afford it, like all those other memories. That was half of it. The other half was a Zen monk who earnestly wanted out, and that part was what had saved me from the creeping suburban soul death. The Zen monk broke his Machiavellian compass. Now Edward VII was headed for a fall, with his drunken and crooked cousin in London, when Napoleon should have been at work, protecting himself from his enemies on the board. Instead, the monk was rolling over for them, taking a sabbatical from a job that didn't offer one, throwing the dice in a game Charles I knew he wouldn't win. The monk didn't want to hear any more from the proverbial they, who exist only in a mirror. Still, occasionally, or even frequently, a tangent of how he appeared to others would be taken up unknowingly by a scoffing familiar spirit, and inflame his narcissistic search for a new hermit crab shell. And the tormenting bullshit, the dissembling, the search for a new narration would come upon his castle builder with a new plan, only to dissolve into a new critique. But had it not been so, the unlikely events now unfolding could never have been imagined, even if it was all prophesied and provoked by my art show. How was it possible that a 14-year-old kid in tie and loafers would, in less than a year's time, be heading to Mexico with only the most perfunctory and incompetent leadership, with no possibility whatsoever of contacting his parents, who were anyway trying to abdicate their responsibilities? The Sacred Heart bus was my saving grace, a divine intervention, leading me to the mouth of heaven, a place unheard of in the city of chemicals and steel, where I might find the bolt cutters for my chains, though I could only conceptualize the situation with an intense feeling of anticipation. I think everyone on that bus, except maybe the cook, was looking for some new software for the old machine, even though no one even knew what software was. I knew for sure the software I'd been given was bogus, but I couldn't put words to any of it. The words seemed inherently off, even rebellious in the mouth. They were too tangled up in fleeting, crippled ideologies, obscured by rationalism, truths known but not understood, flawed methods perpetrated in pursuit of flawed criteria, all culminating in the modern world muddle. This was a crossroads, but it was foggy. We talked and talked, but words were only the dimmest suspicions in the rattling of the Sacred Heart bus. I suspected words were a toy, a game, a pencil to shadow out what is not, leaving only the light, but this light was down a long tunnel that leads to the brilliance of day, but my tunnel looked very long. All that I wasn't talking about was like the beginning of an illness or allergy, an itch in the nose, a tickle in the throat, a foreboding of some hard and counterfeit text in the family book, and the only medicine, my only tools were the faith that Gertie pointed me to in the unspeakably great and small and indefinable. I had a rickety understanding of the powers of allegoria and metaphora, the language of dream and the foundation of every word, that can direct the human hand to build and destroy, but my powers were still so contaminated by the loafer gods that the ass and the elbow were cross-wired and shorting out. We rattled south in the virgin's womb with the pubic hair drawn on it, on the way to the mouth of heaven which we knew nothing of, to see if we could find the holy place to slaughter the goat there. I hadn't put words or images to any of it. It was a sensation in the stomach, not like hunger, more like fear, but not like that either. Maybe I thought the holy place that would save me was between her legs. That was unfair to her, but I wasn't thinking about fairness. I wasn't thinking at all. I was a rabbit on the run. I sensed she had a sex that was not about getting a leg over, but about joining or discovering sensuality and mutuality. An important difference, the important difference, the key to the door leading to the greater garden. There was hope and urgency in my recounting of stories as they should have been, as if yakking would lead me to a settlement of my stomach's search for the final word of things as they actually were. A deep desire for peace that was more than horniness. There was no fear of loneliness. Loneliness was my friend. It was a search for an allegory to shadow out the silly collective prison bars I'd been rattling for years. But none of this metaphora and allegoria ever percolated from vague self-awareness into conversation. We talked, thinking it was a presage of love, but I was hiding, while the wipers slapped on through the gray-green South Texas flatland, coloring the steamed windows green-white, spattered with droplets of jade.